There we are, we're recording. So for those of you who are new to the Zoom format, I am going to mute everybody and not allow you to unmute yourselves. That just makes the class go a little bit smoother. So I'm going to do that now. And then if you have any questions or if you have any anything that needs to be responded to, there is a chat box. If you scroll down on the bottom of your screen, you'll see the word chat. You just click on it, it'll open up a chat room for you. And you, oh shoot. Yeah, I better do that. Oh, I forgot to print us out our handout. Oops. So anyway, you can actually communicate with us in the chat box. We will have either Kate or myself monitoring that, so we'll be able to answer all your questions. So I'm going to take care of that right now. And then we will go to the chat room communication from here on out. There we go. Can everybody hear me now? Can you guys give me a thumbs up? Make sure that we're got the sound on and we're good to go.
Diana says yes.
All right, that's good. All right, so next, I'm going to let Kate do a song and dance while I print out our handout.
A song and dance?
Yeah, what kind of dancing you want to do?
I don't dance. I'll talk about sergers, but I don't dance. So today we are going to be doing the presentation on the Triumph. If items are positioned in a different place, etc., on like the Victory or the Acclaims and things like that, I do have some reference material here that I will be showing you where you might be able to locate the items when we go through the location of all of the bits and pieces on your serger. So I will be pointing to some papers that show you maybe if your stitch selector is in a different place or your presser foot lifter is in a different place, etc. So we will be trying to cross-reference to the different machines as much as we can. Whoa, and I almost dropped you. That would not have been a good start. And we just realized that Patrick and I did not have the handout for ourselves to make sure that we cover everything that we put on the handout. We really don't know how time is going to go. So we're not sure if we're going to get everything covered on that or not.
We can't? Why? Oh, no. Okay. Yes, we do. Okay, I've got our handout now and we are good to go. Yeah, I'll do the first part. So Kate didn't get. All right, I'm going to switch this phone around so you guys know I'm not. So first thing we're going to do is cover the basics of your serger. And what I mean by that is all of the components and the pieces parts. So again, we are going to focus this class on Babylock Sergers, but we will reference other sergers for you. For those of you who have other brands or whatever, we'll also, for those of you who have a Babylock, we're going to point out some of the benefits to owning the Babylock Serger, because there's a ton of benefits because they're so awesome. But anyway, let's start with a couple of really important parts for you. One of them is this little chart that has come with every Babylock Serger, okay, except for the Vibrant. I don't know if anybody out there has the Vibrant, but all of the Japanese made sergers have what they call a quick reference threading guide that looks like this. It's a laminated sheet, and it has, again, in the instance of the Triumph can actually do 86 different stitch combinations, believe it or not. So they and they have the threading path for all 86 of those on this reference chart. If you have the Accord, or excuse me, the Accolade or the Acclaim or Imagine or Victory or whatever, of course, your chart's going to be a little bit different and a little bit smaller, but it is going to look primarily the same. And you can see on here, it has a little chart on the top that lists all of the different needle position that's necessary for the particular stitch that you're on. So, and we are going to be referring to that quite a bit today. So, and you can see for our 4-thread overlock, we've got a picture of what the 4-thread overlock is going to look like. We've got what needle positions that it wants in there, what stitch length it wants, the stitch selector, which is the really important feature I'm going to cover in just a second. That sort of tells the machine what stitch that you want to do. So again, what I'm getting at is make yourself comfortable reading this, because it's going to be a huge benefit to you when you're doing the threading or setting up for this particular stitch that you actually want to sew out.
Patrick?
Yes.
Can I interrupt for just one moment?
Yes, you can.
A lot of them, before you even started this, happened to notice that my machine has the decals and the stickers on them.
We should have talked about that.
Yeah. Do you know if we can still get these?
I think we probably can.
Okay, so if you are interested, if you could put it in the comments, but when you type it in the comments, you need to tell me who you are, because I might have like 5 different Donnas in the class and it will just say Donna and I want the stickers and I don't know who that is. So please, if you are specifying that you are wanting an item that we are showing, please give us your full name so we can make sure that we get that to you.
And what she's referring to is, again, this is a little, one of the educators, a Babylock educator that we bring in all the time, her name is Joan Friedrich, came up with these sticker, the sticker idea that tells you exactly what each of these ports is for. So it's got everything really nicely marked for you. So you don't have to remember what all of these little slot openings are for, what the dials are for, or anything else. So it's really, really cool how she's done that for you. But so again, and that is a really good compliment, by the way, to the threading chart. So that threading chart is really, once you get comfortable reading what it's all about, and I'm going to cover each of these components here for you on what it's talking about in good detail here in the next couple of minutes. Before we do that, I am going to do a little bit of routine maintenance for you on the serger. Again, this is any serger that you guys own. It does require you to oil it. It also requires you to clean it, because on the serger, it is a very it's a lint magnet. So the lint will actually materialize on it very, very quickly. And if you leave it too long, it's very difficult to keep it clean, and it's very difficult to get all of that debris and all of that lint out of there. So I would recommend every 10 to 12 hours of sew time, that's actual time on your foot control, you need to open this up. And again, on the Babylock Sergers, they open up really, really nice, where you can actually use canned air. You could use the little vacuum attachments like we talked about in the machine maintenance class. This door opens on the side. It also opens, of course, in the front, and you can get in there and clean up your serger really nice and quickly if you're doing it every 10 or 12 hours of sew time. So saying that, make sure you're cleaning it. We use the same forms of cleaning on the serger that we do on the sewing machine. Again, canned air tends to be a little more difficult on the serger because of how quickly, and you can see the lint can materialize very, very quickly on these machines just because of the cutting mechanism and everything else in place. But the oil spots, once you clean it, you can oil it. And again, you're going to use a 5-weight sewing machine oil. So we sell it in stores like ours. And it has a really nice, the one that we sell has a nice long tube on it that will reach to the hard to reach places on the serger. And Kate, can you tell me if they can see this? I need a pointer, huh?
I put at her tweezers to your left.
To my left,
That's
my
right.
other left. Where's the tweezers? Maybe the scissors will work. So aha, they were under something. She expects me to find it when they're under something. Can you guys believe that? I had to pick something up to find them. Anyway, here is the same oil that you use on your long arm. Yes, June, that's correct. So the oil points on the serger, and again, this is any serger that you own, whether it's a FOF, a Bernina, a Babylock, whatever. You have a bar that's your, and I hope you guys can all see this. I've got such a tiny little picture, I can't see what I'm showing. But this bar that moves up and down out of your serger needs a drop of oil on it, again, every 10 to 12 hours of sew time. You also have to oil your looper points. Looper bearings is what I meant to say. And again, this particular serger, because we have not only the upper looper, we've got a lower looper, and we've got a chain stitch looper. And all three of those loopers have a bearing on them. Okay, and so the bearing on the lower looper is going to run. Kate, can they see this at all?
They can see how dirty it is in there.
You can see back here where I've got my tweezers, you can see a little bearing that actually drives that looper. Okay, and that's where you want to put your drop of oil for the lower looper. For those of you with a chain stitch looper, yes.
Just let them know that I am like 28 messages back, and so if they're asking stuff, I haven't got to their message.
Oh, okay. So, and then the chain stitch looper is right below that. And again, it's really hard to show that, but, and this is where that long tube oiler really comes into play. And Kate says she's 28 messages behind, so bear with her.
Is it the same oil for the long arm machine?
It is the same oil for the long arm, yes. And again, you're just going to take that tube oiler and you're going to put a drop of oil on the very lower looper. So again, on the Triumph, the Ovation, the Accolade, the Evolution, those all have 3 oil points for you. Anytime you have a 4-thread or a non, where you don't have the chain stitch and cover stitch looper, you only have 2 oil points. Okay, so if you have an Imagine or one of the 4-thread sergers, all you have to worry about is the upper looper and the lower looper. Okay, so that is our routine maintenance portion of this class. Does anybody have any questions on that? And that is all the routine maintenance that you need to know on these machines. Clean them and oil them about every 10 to 12 hours of sew time. Are we good?
We're good.
All right. So now let's cover all of the pieces parts of your machine. So I'm going to go through them one by one here. And again, it's kind of nice because Kate has these stickers on there that I think you guys can sort of read and follow along as we're going. So I'm going to start from the right of the machine. And
can you point to the oil spots one more time, please?
Of course. So we have an oil point on the upper looper. It's the bar that's going to come up out of this little cylinder here. So, and you just put a couple of drops of oil on that bar. Then you're going to put a drop of oil on the bearing for the lower looper, which is this little piece right below that bar. You can see it's below and to the left a little bit. And then below that and to the left of that a little bit is the third point for the cover stitch machines, which is the chain stitch looper. So you've got those 3 loopers that have bearings. That's a metal on metal. And again, keeping those lubricated is going to keep your machine running to peak efficiency. And again, I would do that fairly regularly. Like I said, every 10 to 12 hours of time that you actually have on the foot control, which after this class, you guys are going to be using it all the time. So you're going to be wanting to oil it all the time. All right, so let's now go to we're going to start at the right of the machine and work our way to the left. So for all Babylock owners, who have the tensionless system. And what I mean by that, it's the machines that have the thread delivery system, which Babylock is famous for. You don't have any tension dials on it at all, but you do have a stitch selector knob. And this is when it's telling the machine, yes.
So you can show them both
Okay,
sides.
good, thank you. So it's telling the machine what stitch that you're actually going to be doing for that particular setting that you want. Okay, and again, that stitch selector is going to be on, if we're doing the 4-thread overlock on our machine, you're going to see the stitch selector setting for the 4-thread overlock says A. It wants it to be on the A setting, and this is what it's referring to. For those of you with the Imagine or the Victory, you might see a knob that looks like this. As you can see, we've got our inspirational guide, which Kate is going to talk a lot about here in just a little bit. But this is the inspirational guide for the Victory. And again, it's like an instruction manual on steroids. So it's really, really cool thing to have. If you guys don't have one of these, I highly recommend it. So from there, we're going to move to our presser foot lifter. So again, this is going to raise and lower our presser foot. And you can see as I move that up and down, your presser foot is going to move up and down. Of course, it's really, really important on a serger. You can sew off your fabric, but you want to make sure that your presser foot is down before you start sewing on a serger. That's really important, of course. For those of you with the Imagine or even the Accolade, anything except the Ovation and the Triumph, your presser foot lifter is going to be on the back side of your machine. And you're going to be able to find that on the back side of your machine on every machine except the Triumph and the Ovation. Okay. So we're going to move on. Again, on the Triumph, they've moved this tension, the chain cover stitch tension dial. They moved that to the front of the machine, which I absolutely love that, that enhancement. The rest of you have the little knob over on the side of your machine that's going to actually activate your tension for your cover stitch and your chain stitch. Okay. The next thing you're going to see is the wave and overlock feature. Again, we're going to talk a little bit about the wave stitch today, but the wave and overlock, Kate, we have some samples. Babylock is, again, an exclusive feature of the Babylock machines is this thread delivery system, which holds thread back or releases thread depending on the stitch that you want to do. Okay. Because of that system, they can do a stitch called the wave stitch, which looks like this here. So you can see how it holds thread back, releases thread, holds it back, releases it to give you a really cool decorative edge. And that's the dial that you're going to use to control that wave feature. Most of the sewing, most of the serging that you do, you're going to be in the regular overlock setting on that. The next are our 4th thread delivery tension discs, for lack of a better term. And again, you can see on the Babylocks the way these tension discs work, and I hope you can see that. But as I turn my hand wheel, you're going to see these little plates moving in and out as you turn your hand wheel. Okay, that's what, again, this tension stitch selector knob is controlling in there. Okay, so it's telling the machine, release this much thread or hold this much thread back, and that's why Babylock is the only serger on the market that's a tensionless serger. You never have to adjust tensions because these little plates actually do it for you. Okay, so we then go into our threading ports here, and again, we're going to cover the threading here in just a minute. From there, we're going to go again. Ovation and Triumph have speed control on it, and that's going to be this dial here. No other serger in the Babylock line has speed control on it. So this is only those 2 sergers will have this little slide bar to control your speed. From there, we're going to get into, I'm going to go down low on the machine here. We've got our threading path or our serging path, depending on if we're in threading mode or serging mode. Some of you have a little white dot here that you're going to have to hold in and turn your hand wheel. As you turn your hand wheel and you hold that white button in, all of our loopers are actually going to lock into place. For the ovation, well, actually, what, evolution on up, Kate? Is that right? It has the little handle that you can move into the threading mode. And again, as you turn your hand wheel, it's going to lock all of those loopers in place for easy threading for these machines. Okay, so that's again our little lever on the base of the machine. I want to talk a tiny bit about this little knob here. Again, if you want to fine tune how our plates are moving our thread through our system, if you're not happy with the tensions that you're getting or whatever, you do have a little knob on the front of your machine that will decrease those tensions or increase those tensions depending on if you move it towards the plus or the minus. Okay. Some of you, rather than a little knob on the front, have a little screw. It's a little flathead screw on the front that you can turn back and forth to adjust and fine tune your tensions if for some reason you're struggling getting the stitch to look like you want it to look. Okay, I will tell you that 98% of the time on a Babylock Serger, and I'm going to find a delicate way to say this, if you're having stitch problems, it's generally an external issue that's causing those problems. These machines are so dependable and so reliable. Very seldom do we have any timing issues or any tension issues with them because of how well they're made. And most of the time you can find solutions to those problems from an outside influence, whether it's a bad needle or it's thread that's too old, or you don't have the thread firmly inside of those little platelets that are moving the thread back and forth. So again, I just want to put that out there for you. If you're having stitch problems, try to rethread it, try to do some external things to counteract those problems. All right, so where were we? We were on the threading ports, which Kate, you're going to do the threading, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to move on. This is, again, for cover stitch and chain stitch machines. We have a little lever on the front that will actually lower our looper, our upper looper, and it'll lock it out of place. Okay, so again, we've got the up is going to bring that looper up where it's moving. Down is going to lock it down and out of place. So we're not going to use an upper looper when you're doing your cover or your chain stitch. So you can actually just move that up and down. Over on the side here, we've got our stitch length. And the stitch length has two settings to it. You've got one that's a regular setting that has regular numbers to it. And then if you go past 0 here, you're going to see another set of numbers that have a circle around them. These are actually the rolled hem setting for your sergers, okay? So when you say that, when I say that, what we're doing when we actually move this dial past 0 is you can see in there, we're going to actually move a little stitch finger. I don't know if you guys can see that with the thread in there, but you can see my stitch finger moving forward and backward out of the way. So it's making a really narrow seam or a wider seam, depending on the stitch that we actually want to do. So that's what's happening when you turn your machine to rolled hem setting with our little rolled hem here. We're moving a stitch finger out of the way. So just so you guys know how that works. So again, we've got stitch length. We've got the blade lock, which is, again, you can actually lower our blade down out of the way by turning this to the lock position, and it'll make it so our knife doesn't move up and down. When we put it to the unlock position, you can see the knife then physically moves up and down. And then we have our stitch width tab, which is going to, again, adjust our entire knife system. You can see when we move this backwards and forwards, it's going to move our knife to the left or to the right. So we're cutting less fabric or more fabric depending on the width that we want out of our stitch.
Can you explain that the bigger the number, the longer the stitch length?
That is correct. So on our stitch length, again, bigger the number, the longer the stitch. On our stitch width, I want to explain the difference between these two numbers. So you can see every setting has either a 5.5 or a 3.0 in this instance, or in this instance, it's a 6.5 or a 4.0. That's the difference between whether you're measuring from left needle position or right needle position. If you're measuring from left needle position, it's going to be the bigger number. If you're measuring from right needle position, it's going to be the smaller number. So that's why you've got two number settings there, and those are millimeter measurements. So if we move this to the 6.0, that's 6 millimeters from the left needle position is where our knife is. Is that everybody following me on that? And so that's why you have the 2.5 millimeter difference between those two numbers. Okay, so we're then going to move to our loopers. And again, the loopers are really important to know their function, because this, of course, is the upper looper. And the upper looper, of course, moves above the machine. So that's why they call it the upper looper. The lower looper is the one to the far right as it comes along. And then again, for those of you with cover and chain stitch machines, you also have the chain stitch looper, which you unfortunately, you never really see the eye of it because it is sort of inset into the under the feeding mechanism when you're doing cover and chain stitch. So those are our three loopers. Next thing we're going to talk about is our subsidiary looper. So if you're doing a 2-thread on any type of stitch, the job of the upper looper is to bring the thread up to the needles. Okay, on a 2-thread, the only looper that we're using on a 2-thread is our lower looper. So we need to trick the machine into thinking there's a thread in the upper looper. So we've got the subsidiary looper that's going to come. The way they work, they're on little springs on the Babylock. For those of you with FOF or something, sometimes they're a separate component that comes off. With Babylock, they're actually attached to the machine, which I like because you don't lose it. You don't have a tendency to lose it. So anyway, this pulls back, it comes forward, and it just locks into the looper on the back side of that looper into the hole. And what it does is it makes the machine, it fools the machine into thinking there's thread in there, so it can pick up that thread and can pull it up to the needles with the lower looper. Okay, I hope everybody's following me on that. And again, you can disconnect it by pulling it, or connect it by pulling it out and then springing it forward, disconnect it by pulling it forward and springing it back. So that's how that looper works. We then go to our needle bar, which is going to have, in this instance, for those of you with 4-thread sergers, you're only going to have 2 needle positions. You've got an 01 and an 02. If you've got a cover stitch machine, you also have the cover stitch needles, which are C1, 2, and 3 on the cover stitch. Okay. We, of course, have our presser foot. And again, the presser foot lifter on most of the machines is going to be on the back side of that presser foot. For the Ovation and the Triumph, we've already covered that. And then we have release our feet, you have a little tab on the back of that presser foot that you push down and it'll snap the foot off. And then you'll line that up and lower your presser foot down in order to reconnect that foot. Okay. So Kate, was I good enough there? Was I too good?
Somebody wanted you to repeat something, but I did a direct message. I'm waiting to hear back.
Okay. All right. So now for those of you with the geez, I lost my train of thought. Ovation, Triumph, and Acclaim, you also have a looper threading system, and excuse me, a needle threading system on your machines. So that needle threading system is activated by going into threading mode locking all of your loopers in place by turning your hand wheel. And then you can actually, over on the far right or left side of the machine, you'll see a little lever that you can bring forward, and it'll actually bring those needle threader mechanisms down in place. And you can see there's 5 of them for the 5 different needle positions. If you have an acclaim, you're only going to see the 2 needle positions, but it again, and it works with air, where you get your thread just close enough to the needle, and that air will actually pull the thread out through the eye of the needle. It's the coolest thing in the history of threading.
Repeat what you just said about the blade information.
The blade, yes. So if we want to lower the blade and we don't want to use it, which if you're good at a serger, I would recommend that. Or if you're doing cover stitch or chain stitch, you have to lower the blade. But we're going to lower the blade by touching or turning the little white lever here, and it'll go to the lock position, and that's going to lower that blade down out of the way. So when we turn our hand wheel, oh shoot. When we turn our hand wheel, you can see our blade is no longer moving up and down. If we go to the unlock position, it will then unlock that blade, and the blade then starts to move up and down, so it'll actually do cutting for us. So that's the way to actually disengage your blade or re-engage your blade.
Okay, so the Ovation does not have the jet air needle threading system. That
Correct.
was one of the difference between the Ovation and the Triumph. And adjusting the closeness of your blade really is your determination based on the stitch width. So the stitch width determines how close it moves the blade. So you basically are moving the blade closer to the needles or further away from the needle.
So I'm going to see if I can show that to you on the camera here. So again, as we turn our width dial here, and again, what those numbers mean is millimeters away from left needle position or millimeters away from right needle position. And we're actually moving that entire blade left or right, depending on how wide you want that stitch. Show where to what? I missed that question.
So Joy, when you get the recording, you'll be able to see that Patrick has shown a couple of times where you oil the machine.
Yeah, so you will be able to see in pretty good detail on where to oil that.
So Patty, when I get into thread the machine, I'm going to be doing the actual threading. Patrick is just locating the parts of the machine for you right now.
Okay, so one last one that I want to cover here is going to be our needle tension, and this is for cover stitch only. So we can actually adjust our tension with a little dial over on the side here for the cover stitch. Again, we have Overlock with the thread delivery system. Then we go to our cover stitch settings for our Ovation, Triumph, Evolution. All the 8-thread sergers have this separate tension assembly over on the side for cover and chain stitch. And again, we've got 3 separate paths here for the 3 separate needle positions that we have for cover and chain stitch. So you're going to be able to go through those. Again, Kate will show you some tricks on how to thread those nice and easy when she does the threading here. So, and then over on the side, we also have pressure foot pressure on the very side here, this big dial on the Ovation and the Triumph is going to control how much pressure is on our presser foot. And again, it has a neutral setting, which I would recommend highly for the Triumph and Ovation. For those of you with the pretty much all the other sergers, you're going to see a little white spinny thing, for lack of a better word. Is that a good way to describe that? There's a little white dial on the top that you're going to be able to tighten or loosen to release pressure or put more pressure on, depending on what kind of fabric that you have through your machine. Again, it's on the top of the machine. It has a big white plastic like screw, like a flat screw driver that you can release the pressure on that or put more pressure on it, depending on what you want to do there.
Where's the one on the Evolution? Is it on the side of the machine?
No, it's on top also. I think, isn't it? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm going off of memory. Another thing we love about the Babylock Sergers is they do a wonderful job on labeling their spool pins. So you know, this is chain needle 1, this is chain needle 3, chain needle 2, so on and so forth. And they also have really started doing a great job on their antennas, their thread antennas on the top, on labeling what each of those are, what needle positions they need, what overlock. These are the overlock needles. These are the chain needles. Then you've got the upper looper, lower looper, and then of course your chain stitch looper here.
It's on the top. It's just an adjusting screw on the Evolution.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so all of the Sergers except Ovation and Triumph, the pressure foot pressure is going to be an adjusting screw on the top of the machine. It's a plastic manual dial that you can turn with your fingers, or you could put a screwdriver in there. And again, you're going to go righty tighty, lefty loosey to control the pressure of the presser foot. Okay. Did you want me to cover anything else?
No, I can take over.
All right. So now the master is going to take over the class here. So
I wish I had the neck thing.
oh yeah, really, huh? Did we get rid of that?
I think one of those has it.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and I'm going to go monitor questions.
Okay, I want to position this so I can see what you can see, if that makes sense. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, my serger is actually already threaded up, but I'm just going to go ahead and remove all of the threads.
I'm going to answer this question. Soki, yes, the cover stitch portion of your machine requires EL series needles. So it's going to require the EL needles. They have a little tab on the back of them that helps with the cover stitch and the chain stitch. So you can use, if you're just doing overlock, you can use a regular needle. But if you're doing cover stitch, you're going to want to make sure that you're using the EL series needle for the cover stitch portion of your machine. And I would just get used to using the EL series needle for everything, so you don't get confused about what needle types you have in there. But again, it's imperative that you use EL for the cover stitch.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is talk about the basic stitch, which is our basic 4-thread overlock. And it appears from some of the questions that I've had come through that we have people that either own a serger but have never used it, don't know anything about it, through to some probably more experienced people on the sergers. So I think Patrick and I have not discussed this, but I do think that probably what we're going to be doing is we're going to keep this as the basic class, and then maybe do a second class that is more advanced, where we go into some of the more advanced features, and we will get that scheduled and let you all know about that. And because I'm not sure that we're going to have time to do everything that the serger has to offer. But the one thing that I wanted, did you have something to say?
Really quick question here. She wanted to know, is it easier to pull the threads out? Should we always pull the threads out from below the stitch? Or how do you recommend?
Okay, so when I just cut my threads, I cut them up right here, right before the tension. And then I went to the back of the machine where my chain was already formed, and I just pulled them back.
And it'll pull right out after it.
Yeah, sometimes you have to wiggle on your hand wheel just a little bit to kind of release a stitch that might be halfway formed. But once you just wiggle on that hand wheel, they should just pull right out. The one thing I do want to point out that Patrick, I didn't hear him say it, so I may have missed him, but on the Babylock, if you have one of the 8-thread sergers, there is color coding going on. Did you mention that? No?
I did say they were labeled, but I didn't.
Okay,
mention
so when we look back on our platform where we have our threads sitting, you will see that they actually tell us exactly which spool of thread is going where. So this one is currently telling us this is the chain needle number 3. If I lift this up, you're going to see that it says overlock needle number 2, and this one is lower looper. So everything, you basically have 2 machines in one when you're looking at the 8 thread sergers. So you have an overlock machine and you have a cover stitch machine. And what we're going to be focusing today is on the overlock machine, which will basically cover all of the Babylock sergers. So what we are doing here is we are making sure that we put a spool of thread on our upper looper, our lower looper, our overlock needle number 1, and our overlock needle number 2. So that is what we are doing. And then what we are going to do is we are going to take our thread from the cone, and we are going to bring it from the outside to the inside directly through this little guide. Some of the guides will have these fuzzes on them, depending on your machine. Some of them will not. Don't try and take those fuzzes out if you have them. So we're going to do that with all 4 positions. So we are doing lower looper, upper looper, overlock needle number 2, and overlock needle number 1. And your machines should come with that all printed on there. Oops. Okay, then what we have is we have a pre-tension guide. These are your tensions. So we have a pre-tension guide, and your pre-tension guide is this bar right here. You see this bar right here? And the thread is going to come down so that it is positioned. And what I do is I just keep a little bit of tension on the thread, and I drop it down into that pre-tension guide. So we're going to drop this straight down, keep it nice and tight, straight down into your pre-tension guide. I'm going to do that with each of the 4 threads.
You got a mess.
I got a mess up here. So my next one is my upper looper. Again, keep the thread nice and tight. You'll hear it snap into place. I'm going to stop talking so you can hear it. And then straight down. And then each one for my 2 needles. Personally, I always stand up to do this part of the threading. So I'll put my spools of thread onto the corresponding spool pins, bring them up over the top of the telescopic thread guide, bring them down through my pre-tension, down through my tension, and then I sit back down again. One of the big differences between a Babylock that has the tubular loopers and a regular serger that does not is the capability that you can thread in any order that you want. Traditionally, sergers, you always had to thread in a specific order. If one of your thread broke, you had to unthread and rethread from the beginning. And that is not the case with the Babylock because the threads are passing up inside the tubes. It does not matter which order we thread this in.
Woohoo.
Okay, so what we have here is we have another little thread guide right below the tension. So we want to make sure that we get those 2 threads in there. We're going to be concentrating with our upper and lower looper threads. So the first thing we're going to do to get the machine ready to thread is we are going to turn this dial to the threading. Now your serger may have a push button that you need to hold in. So you may need to hold in the push button and turn the hand wheel towards you, or you will just put this to the threading and then you will turn the hand wheel towards you and you're going to hear kind of a popping noise, and that is going to be your loopers connecting.
Yay.
Once you have done that, we are going to take the thread. Always give yourself a clean cut on the thread. Don't hold your thread like this. It's like trying to control a floppy noodle. It's not going to do what you want it to do. So you want to hold the thread, I like to say, about 1 inch away from the end. And you are going to hold your thread in an upright or a downward position and put about a 1/2 inch into the port. Depending on your machine, you may need to do each of these separately, or you may be able to do them together. So a new cut, 1/2 inch away from the end, put it into the threading port, and I'm putting 1 into the U port and 1 into the L port, which is my upper and lower looper. And then Patrick, if you want to put the camera right here. And then I'm just going to push on the little button that says push to thread loopers.
She didn't give herself enough slack. So if that happens to you, ladies, if the thread doesn't come shooting out like that, it means that you didn't give yourself enough slack on that thread. And all you have to do is give yourself a little more slack and push the button again.
And so I have both my loopers threaded.
There's a couple of questions. I'm going to go see if I can answer.
Okay. Okay, so now
what are the plastic things that slide over the spool pins before putting thread on the spool pin? Is she talking about?
I'm going to presume that she's talking about the cone adapters. So I'm presuming you might be talking about these, and these should be used if you're using Serger cone thread. They actually take up the slack in your spool pin, and I've got a couple that don't have them up here, so let me show you the difference. This one right here does have my spool cap on it. When my spooler thread sits on here, it's nice and firm. This one does not. And you see what I've got here? I've got movement, okay? So that is not ideal. You want it so that it's nice and firm. So you do want to make sure that you're using your cone adapters. So now what we're going to do is we are going to thread the 2 needles. So overlock needle number 1 is going to come through the left thread guide. We're going to take the thread. There's a tiny little guide right here. You're going to make sure it goes under here. There is another guide right here. And then it's going to go underneath here and up over the top and straight down. And I'm just going to let it sit there for just a moment whilst I go get its partner. And we're going to take it from here. I think I've got it, Patrick. We're going to take it across the exact same thread path, up over the top and back down. Okay, now we have a little bar right in here. Let's see if you can see that. And the left thread is going to want to go into that bar before the right needle thread. So I'm going to take both of the threads through there. And then we are going to show you how to use the jet air threading. So in order to use the jet air threading on the needles, you're still going to have your loopers connected. So you still want to engage have your threading system set up for the threading. So this should still be down. Your tubes should still be locked. Now, most of you at this point would either have to use the standard built-in needle threader, or you would have to thread your needles manually. But the Triumph did come out with air threading. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put our presser foot down. It gives us a little bit more working area. And then Patrick showed you there is a bar on the left side of the machine. We're going to go ahead and we're going to bring that bar down, and that yellow mechanism comes down, and let me move my threads out of the way, and it will connect to the needles that I'm going to thread.
Patty asked, how do you know which is the right and left needles? 01 would be the right needle, and 02 would be the left needle. And don't ask me why they named them 01 and 02. I think it should be opposite. But and you can just pull on your thread, Patty, to so you know which one you're threading into which needle.
Okay, so I've tried to get the camera really nice and close. Okay,
so as Kate pulls on the thread, you can see it pulling off of one of the needles, and that's or pulling off of one of the spools of thread, and that's how you know which thread you're threading into which needle.
Okay,
that makes sense.
So now what we're going to do, again, we've got a edge of the thread. I'm going to give myself a clean cut. And let me show you up here first, because I didn't show this to you. So what we have here for our threading of the Jet Air threading, we have to tell it whether we are threading the chain cover needles or the overlock needles. So you want to make sure you have that on overlock needles. And then this is the button. I'm going to have the camera down close to the needles, so you're not going to see me push this, but it says push to thread needles. So what I'm going to do is find my left needle thread.
It's hard to do with the camera, isn't it?
It's, yeah. And I've given myself a clean cut. All I need to do is to put my thread somewhat close to the eye of the needle and push on the button. And then when I pull or push back up my lever, it grabs a hold of that thread and threads the needle for me. So I do not recommend you try to do both needles at the same time. It is a little bit of a challenge. So we're going to bring this down again. And now I'm going to thread my right needle. I'm going to give myself a clean cut. I'm going to place my thread close to the eye of the needle. I'm going to push on the button.
Yeah, sucked it out of her hand.
And it has threaded both of my needles for me. Okay, so at this point, we should be threaded up for our basic 4 thread. One of my goals today is that you all are very comfortable in using your quick reference threading guide. So the quick reference threading guide is what Patrick was showing you earlier, and it too is color coded. So again, we are working on the green, and the stitch that we are going to be working on today is the 4 thread. So I am going to take you through the process of understanding how to follow this chart, because I believe if you can follow this chart, you can thread up for any stitch that you want. So the first thing it tells us is what needles to use. So you're going to see there, it says C1, 2, and 3, and O1 and 2. And there is a needle in O1 and 2. And we already know that we have our needles in there and we have them threaded. The next icon along is us.
I'm sorry, do you think it would be advantageous to show them how to change those needles?
I'm going to when we do different stitches. The next icon along is our stitch length. If it gives me a range, I'm a mediocre type of person. I'm going to put it right in the middle. So if it tells me that my stitch length should be 2.5 to 4, I'm going to probably put it somewhere just right around the 3.0. And we all know where our stitch length is because Patrick was showing us that just a little bit earlier. My stitch width should be set between 6.5 and 7.5. So I'm going to go right at 7. The next one is my stitch selector. My stitch selector should be set to A. My wave selector, if you have in one of the Babylocks that has the wave stitch, it should be set to overlock. if there is a dash in a box, it means it doesn't matter where it is set because it's not going to come into play. The next thing on here is your looper selector needs to be up and working. Our blade position needs to be up. Our knife cover needs to be on. And our subsidiary looper needs to be to the right. So having told you all of that, we are actually now ready to start serging. So the only thing I have to do in order to be able to start serging is to put my threading port back up to my serging, and that has disconnected the loopers so that they will now work. We're going to close up our front doors. We are going to set the camera down. Just grabbing a piece of fabric.
And that is a good idea, Charlene, to mark those as well as possible. And that those stickers we were talking about earlier have stitch width, they have stitch length, so you can, it's all marked for you with those stickers too, which is kind of cool. Where are you going?
I don't know. I was trying to get a
bird's eye view.
Yeah.
And yeah, we do sell those stickers. I think we can still get those stickers.
Okay, so what we're doing is we're ready to start serging. A serger is designed to sew on air, so you do not need to make sure that your fabric is all the way back to the needles, okay? So we can actually start to stitch right from this position. Hey, Patrick,
yeah,
will you lift my serger up and back just a couple of inches?
How's that?
I think that's good. Okay, so now I'm going to try and serge slowly. So I'm going to set my speed to a medium speed. And you're going to see here that my blade is trimming off my fabric. And you'll also notice that I didn't worry about making sure that all of my threads were underneath my presser foot to start. You can pretty much just start to serge wherever those threads ended up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my fabric all the way back. I'm going to make a big circle with it, and I'm going to let the blade cut off my chain. And here is my stitch. So when we look at this stitch, the far left stitch is what is being created with the left needle. The second straight stitch in is what is being stitched with the right needle. The thread that is going left to right here is what is being stitched with my upper looper. I'm sorry?
It's a little blurry. Move it back just a hair. There you go.
And then the back side of the stitch is actually what is being used with my lower looper. So there we have our basic 4 thread. And I hope you will all see how nice and quick and easy it is to be able to get your machines to sew that beautiful stitch for you. So this is the basic stitch on a serger. This is the stitch that you're going to use for all of your garment construction. Standard width, which is going to be about 7 millimeters. That's going to be from the left needle position to the edge of the fabric. And then my stitch length is going to be how close these stitches are together. So I'm going to change my stitch length. Remember, my stitch length is the bottom dial. I'm going to change my stitch length to a lower number, so maybe about 1.5. I'm going to sew on the opposite side of this fabric so you can see what it would look like with a smaller stitch length. Same stitch, just a difference in the stitch length. Okay, can I see that handout, Patrick?
Maybe.
Okay, so a couple of things we're going to talk about. I am going to just put this back to a standard stitch length, which is going to be right around 3. But the things we're going to talk about right now is how we can do outside and inside corners on a serger. Bear with me for just one moment.
You go. Hold, please.
Okay, so if we wanted to serge across the top of here and then serge back down, there's several different ways that you can do it. The first way is to serge on and serge off. So I'm going to serge on my fabric and I'm going to serge off my fabric.
Hey, real quick question here. We're not too far. If a 3/8 inch width is required, what would be the setting or position on the foot to meet that requirement?
I'm going to show you how to determine when you have a specific size seam that you're trying to create. I am going to cover that for you.
Okay.
Okay, so here we've just serged off the piece of fabric and we've got one tail. Now, if I serge along the corresponding edge of the fabric, it will trim off my first tail, but I still have a start tail. So here's the different ways that we can compensate for this. One way is to use a product called Freestop, Fray Block. Fray Block is basically a thread glue or a fabric glue. And what it does, you'll just put a couple of little drops onto the edge where your tail is. You'll let it dry completely, and then you will trim it off. And that would give you a complete outside corner. The other way you can do that is to use your double-eyed needles. Your double-eyed needles have a large eye in them. I'm trying to find my open one here. Is it on that desk that you're on, Patrick? Oh, nope, it's right here. So here is a double-eyed needle. It's got a large loop on both ends. And what you do is you take your chain, you thread it through the hole, just like you would if you were threading a needle. And then you bury it through the back for about 1 inch. Feed it through, and then you can trim it off. So that is one way that you can finish an outside corner. So tray check or bury the chain. But there's also a way that you can do it on your serger, and that's what we're going to look at right now. So the way that you can do it on your serger is you are going to stitch to the corner. And what you want to do is you want to stitch 1 stitch off your fabric. So you're stitching into the air. And you are going to raise your needles to the upright position. You are going to raise your presser foot, because what that does is it releases the tension. You are going to pull your fabric back just a hair, so that the stitches are not on the stitch finger. Sometimes you might need to give yourself a little bit of needle slack, just like 1/2 inch or so of thread. Pull your stitches back, and then what you can do is reposition your fabric so that it's ready to come down for the next side. Now, before I start to stitch, remember I've got a bubble of thread in there. Do you remember I had like a 1/2 inch of thread or so? So now you would pull back on that thread so that you don't get a bubble.
Did you guys see that okay? I hope.
And then what you have is an outside corner without having to, you'll get an outside corner without having to use a fray check and without having to manually feed your chain through the stitch.
They want to redo the bubble. So
Redo the bubble. You know what? We are going to be redoing clearing the stitch finger, which is what it's called. We're going to be redoing that here in just a moment on another exercise. So clearing the stitch finger, getting on and off from your serging stitches is going to be something that we're going to be covering when we do an outside circle here in just a moment. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, what?
Juanita says she's named her serger Jack Russell Sergio.
Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we want to learn how to do an inside corner. And I was going to do it on denim because this would more often than not be done on a heavier fabric. But my thread is black. The denim is obviously blue. You're not going to be able to see my stitches very well. So I am going to go ahead and just do it on this orange fabric because I want you to be able to see. So all I've done here is cut inside an inside corner. And what we want to do is we want to start serging at this top edge. We want to come down, but the trick is that we're going to be pulling this so that it comes flat so that we can stitch all the way down. This can take practice. I haven't taught this serger class in probably 6 or 8 years. So I haven't practiced this technique in 6 or 8 years. That's my prefix to the fact that it might not be successful first time. Okay, so let's talk about how we're going to do this. We're going to start to serge. Now, what we need to understand is that our needles, I'm going to reposition the camera here. Our needles are back here, serging, okay? They're all the way back. But our blade is cutting the fabric right here. There's about almost an inch difference right there. So what we are watching, we don't want to watch our needles at this point. We want to watch our blade, because otherwise what will happen is our blade will continue to keep cutting into this fabric and we don't want it to. So as soon as the blade reaches this 90-degree point right here, what I'm going to be doing is pulling this back so that it is flat. And the idea is that the stitches do not fall off this 90-degree edge, okay? So my blade has got to the point now where it's going to start trimming my fabric. So I'm going to start taking and easing my fabric around so that it will go. If you have slow speed, this is definitely a time you would want to use the slow speed. And I'm trying to do this around the corner and around the camera too. So we'll see how well I did. And not bad, okay? Can you see a little bit of air in here? Okay, but you still want it to look like it is a 90-degree corner. Now remember, this is a learned technique. You have to practice this. The first few times you do it, you're probably going to have a hole right here where you've got air and your stitches are completely off the fabric. So just work with that and practice a little bit with that. Okay,
You
the
don't have
next
a clear foot here, do you? So it'd be easier to see if you had a clear foot.
pardon?
Somebody made a comment that it would be easier to see if we had a clear foot.
Oh, yeah, the clear foot would actually be a good, I do not have a clear foot. I think we are going to do a separate, the advanced class where we're going to go over some of the extra feet. There's only going to be 1 or 2 feet that we're going to be looking at today. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is our differential feed. So your differential feed is this right here.
Oh,
And it
cover that.
You forgot to cover that?
Yeah.
Okay, you're fired.
I know.
Okay, so differential feed is a feeding, is a feeding movement. I wanted to be able to show it to you nice and close. N is normal. So if you're sewing on regular cotton fabrics and everything looks great, that's where you should be set. Differential feed allows you to adjust the feeding movement of the front set of feed dogs. I'm going to take the foot off here in a minute and show you how you have two sets of feed dogs on a serger. If I increase my differential feed, and it does have like preset things, so it just kind of, it will click into place as you go up. 2.0, that means that the front feed dogs are going to work twice as fast as the back feed dogs. Now, maybe you have your machine set to normal, but your fabric is gathering on you naturally. This might happen if you're trying to serge on like a sheer fabric or a really, really lightweight batiste fabric, something really fine. You might find that your fabric is puckering a little bit on you. So in order to do that, you want your feed dogs to move slower. You want it to stretch that fabric out. And that's when you would set it at a 0.8 or a 0.6. Those are your only two choices for that. So what we're going to do is we are going to take a look at what changing your differential feed is going to do. So the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this up to 2.0, and I'm going to still use my basic 4 thread. Oops, I think I was up here. So I'm going to use my basic 4 thread. And remember, I haven't done anything but change my differential feed. And I think you can see what's happening already. My fabric is gathering on me. So this is one of the really fun things on a serger, is that you can actually gather your fabric on a serger. So by doing nothing but changing my differential feed, you can see I've got a nice, pretty gather. Now, when we do gathering on a sewing machine, you would normally run 2 rows of straight stitching and pull those stitches up, correct? You can do the same thing on a serger. You can still use your differential feed, and then you can locate your 2 needle threads. Your 2 needle threads, remember, are your 2 straight stitches. So I can actually locate my 2 needle threads by pulling them out right here. And now I can adjust those gathers if I wanted more gathers, just like you can on a regular sewing machine where you can pull those up. But wait, there's more. Are you ready for this? This is how you pull out your serging stitches. Are you ready for this? All you do is continue to pull. Okay, you pull all of the 2 needle threads out. Once you've pulled the needle threads out of the stitch, the looper threads are going to unravel, and you have just pulled out a whole area of serging stitches. So if you didn't get anything else out of this class but that right there on how to unsew your serging stitches,
That's it.
That's it. Okay, but I am going to go one step further with you on the gathering, because I absolutely, it's the only foot that we're really going to show today. I absolutely love this sergering. That's a new word. That's a new word. This serger foot. This is my favorite all-time serger foot that they have. And it is a ruffling foot. And what this will do is gather for you even more than what the machine just did a few minutes ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise up my presser foot, raise up my needle, and on the back of my ankle, I have a release button. I know Patrick showed that to you. We are going to push in on the release button, and it is going to release the foot. Did you notice that I pulled that out from the side? When you attach your feet, you want to do it from left to right, from the side of the machine. So this foot has a slot. Can you see that groove slot in here? Okay. And it's important because this foot will work two ways. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring the foot in from left to right, line it up with the little claw on the ankle, and it will snap right in place. Sometimes it doesn't always snap right in place. Sometimes you will need to just push on the little button at the back of the ankle again. Okay, so what we're going to do this time is we are going to gather and attach all in the same operation. So what we're going to do here is we are going to put the fabric that you want to gather right side up, right side facing you, underneath the presser foot. Put the presser foot down. Now you're going to take the fabric that you want to attach it to, and you are going to slide that in through the slot. And what I would do is take a couple of stitches to lock it in place, because otherwise these fabrics are loose and you want to have a little bit of pressure on them. Now, when you are gathering, lots of things come into play. The weight of your fabric can come into play, whether your fabric is starched or unstarched, if it has any finishing agents on it. The other thing that can come into play is the weight of the ruffle. If you've got a large ruffle and there's a lot of weight on this piece of fabric, so you want to make sure that this fabric is freely moving into the machine. You want to make sure that you are not making it come from the floor with the weight of that strip all the way up into the machine. You want to help it. The next thing you're going to do to help it is to keep these layers separated. You don't want to just let it sit down on top of itself and expect it to separate and gather for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep my finger in between here to keep the top fabric away from my bottom fabric. And I'm not making any other changes to the machine.
Know what the difference between the ruffling foot and the shearing foot is.
Okay. And there you have a gather and attach. Isn't that beautiful?
That's cool.
Okay, so the difference between a ruffling foot and a shearing foot. A ruffling foot will basically shear and ruffle, as opposed to a shearing foot that will just shear. And I'm going to show you, I don't have the shearing foot here, but I'm going to show you what it, after I pick you up.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you what the difference is. So
basically, have a shearing foot.
Pardon?
You don't. We don't have a shearing foot.
So the shearing foot will just gather. It will not gather and attach. So the shearing foot does not have that tongue separator. So remember, if you're only going to buy one foot, buy the ruffling, because it will actually do both applications. So what we're going to do here is we are putting the fabric that we want to gather underneath the foot. And all we're doing is gathering.
That's what a shearing foot would do.
Yes, we'll just do the gather. Okay. Basically the shearing foot has like a groove on the underneath side, and it allows the fabric to collect underneath there for you a little bit. The shearing foot is a newer foot, but the ruffling foot is definitely, in my opinion, the way to go. I don't have the price of the ruffling foot. I think they're right around $50. If you are wanting to order one, make sure you let us know which serger you have, because there are different feet that work on different machines. Okay, So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to remove one of our needles. So what we're going to do is we're going to convert to a 3-thread wide. And you're going to be really tired of this quick reference threading guide because we're going back there. So the 3-thread wide, the first thing you will notice is that it only has one needle in there. Okay, everything else is pretty much going to be the same. Even our stitch selector, which is set to A, is going to remain the same. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove my gathering foot and put my standard foot back on again. And that time it didn't lock in place. So you probably saw me just push on the little button at the back. So you have, depending on your serger, it will either be a little Allen tool that looks like this, or it could be a flat screwdriver. Leave your needle threaded. And I strongly advise that you leave your needle threaded when you are removing your needle, because that way, if you accidentally drop it, it's still threaded and you should be able to pull it up out of the machine. So what we are doing, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. So we're putting the screwdriver into the right slot. We're going to do half a turn to the left, and that should pull, loosen up enough that you can release this needle. Now, because my needle is still threaded, if I was to drop this, it wouldn't matter. So it's not until I have the needle out of the machine will I go in and clip my thread to remove the needle completely. So I've removed my needle, tighten back up the screw. These machines have a lot of vibration in them. And what that does is it can, with that needle screw being released and the vibration of the machine, it can loosen itself completely and come completely out of the machine. And then you're searching for a tiny screw. So if you remove a needle, go ahead and remove and tighten back up that screw. The next thing you need to remember to do is to completely remove your thread completely from the machine. And I say this because what will happen is I just trimmed my thread up here, and look how my thread misbehaved. It kind of created a nice little tangle up there. With the vibration of the machine, what's going to happen is that this thread is going to get caught into another spool of thread and create a nice mess for me. Okay, so when you are removing a needle and you're removing a thread, completely remove the spool of thread off the machine and set it on your table. Do not leave it there. So the only thing I've done is remove the needle, remove the thread completely from the machine, and I have now converted to what we would call a 3-thread wide. So it is eliminating, whoops, my differential feed back to normal. So can you see the difference in this stitch? Now it has eliminated that second row of stitching in there. So this is our 3-thread wide. This is the stitch that you would use for decorative. This is definitely a decorative stitch. Now I did bring some of our stitch samples from the store so I can show you a couple of different things here. So I want you to see the difference between these two stitches. Can they see those pretty good, Patrick?
Really well.
Okay, there is no difference in this stitch other than the thread that was used. This is what I just sewed. Regular serger thread, 3-thread wide. But look how pretty this one looks. Okay, this is using an 8-weight decorative thread. So if you are sewing something, we're going to be doing those serger drawstring bags for the charity event that we just announced. And on the edge of the pocket, this is one of the options, is to put a decorative thread in. You wouldn't want this stitch. This stitch looks too utility looking, but this stitch looks really pretty because we've got a nice pretty thread in there. So a lot of these stitches will look very different if you change the thread.
Janet wanted to know why do you want it to cut the fabric?
Why do you want it to cut the fabric?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, if you are making garment construction, your seam allowances are normally set to a 5/8 seam, or you cut in a 5/8 seam allowance when you're cutting out your garments. And so depending where you have your needle positioned and where you have your fabric, your looper stitches have to go on the edge of the fabric. So you can't just move your fabric over to the right and think that the needle is going to stitch at the 5/8 seam allowance, and that your looper stitches are going to be wider. What's going to happen is it will jam. If you turn your knife off and move your fabric over, what happens is it will create an issue there. So a lot of the times you might have an uneven edge. So you might have an edge that isn't trimmed even. A lot of the times when you're doing decorative serging, maybe you just want it to trim just the hair. So you're just letting it kind of tidy up the edges. So it really depends what application you're doing, whether you have extra built-in seam allowances on there or whether you are just wanting to run it up against the blade edge.
And it's a really good protection too, for those of you who are not good at a serger. That blade, like Kate said, if that upper looper comes up and catches the edge of your fabric, it will cause a horrible mess for you, and the blade sort of protects that for you.
Well, hopefully, Janet, you are learning something about a serger. I know that we have everything from nothing to pretty experienced people in here. So the next thing I want to show you is if you wanted to serge around the outside edge of something, how do you start without a slanted edge coming in, and how do you end without the stitch sliding off? So that's what we're going to learn. So what we're going to do is, I'll show you what I'm doing here in just a second. What I have done is just cut in my seam allowance. Okay, so I've cut into this edge. What this will allow me to do is to be able to raise my presser foot up. Do you remember we talked about clearing the stitch finger? Okay, if I try to push this over, it's only going to allow me to go so far because my needle thread is halfway in a stitch formation. So here's how you clear your stitch finger. You take your needle thread and you just give yourself just about 1/2 inch of slack. And then what you do is you pull on your chain at the back. You want to pull it directly back. And now I can get my blade and my needle right up into that groove that I cut out. And what I can do now is start to serge. And the idea here is, and this is a great practice technique, do it on a piece of denim or some upholstery fabric. I'm doing it on a piece of felt because that's all I could find in my sewing room this morning. But what you want to do is you want to just slowly serge all the way around and try and keep an even amount that it's trimming. Okay, so this is where we can have trouble, where we are joining back up. First of all, you want to find your chain. Here's my starting chain. So just bring that over. And what we want to do is we want to let the blade cut this off. And now it's cut it off. I know that it's starting to get to the point where I started to stitch. So we want to make sure that our blade does not cut the stitching. So you are starting to keep it slightly to the left so that the blade is not cutting your stitches, and you're going to over sew about 1 inch. And then we need to figure out how we're going to get this out of the serger. What a lot of people do is just serge straight off, but you get a really ugly, slanted seam if you do that. So what we've done is we've over sewn about 1 inch. We're going to raise our needle to the upright position. We're going to raise our presser foot up. We're going to give ourselves that needle slack. And now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the whole project back, because there's a stitch finger. There's these little prongs, and the stitches are forming over these prongs. What we need to do is to get the stitches to fall off the edge of the prongs. You can't pull the thread to the side. What's going to happen if you do that is you're going to pull on those pins, and you don't want to pull those pins out of that needle plate. Okay, that's bad. So we're going to pull back. You always pull back and then to the left. So you pull back and then to the left, put your presser foot back down and continue to serge. And that is how you will get off without getting that slanted edge. Now at this point, you've got a couple of choices. You can use your double-eyed needle and feed it through. You can use your fray block. Put some fray block on there, let it dry, and then cut it off. Okay.
Good job. Okay.
I'm looking for something. Okay, so this is the next technique you can actually do with a 4-thread or a 3-thread wide. You would not want to do it as a narrow stitch. What I'm going to do is I'm just taking like a 6-inch piece of a cotton square, and I'm basically just going to cut in a neckline. Obviously, this size neckline is a lot harder to work with than if you had a full size neckline. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take some ribbing, and you want to make sure that it's cut so that the stretch is the lengthways. And we are going to fold this in half. And then we are going to lay the ribbing with the raw edge of the ribbing even with the raw edge of your fabric, and line it up. Now you'll notice that I very seldom use my presser foot lifter when I'm starting and stopping. I do when I'm doing that clearing the stitch finger, but I actually use my thumb and tip the front of my foot up and pop my fabric underneath it. So when I'm starting and stopping, I generally am not using my presser foot lifter. And just like a lot of the other techniques we've talked about, go ahead and get your stitches locked in. What that will allow you to do is to now put pressure on this, and we can start to pull our fabric and our ribbon, and we are just stitching this in place. And you'll notice that the only thing that I'm doing here is letting my blade cut off any excess. So you want your ribbon to be about 2/3 of your actual size of your fabric. See how pretty an edge that is? Okay. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to do this in a different order. The next thing we're going to do is our narrow rolled hem. I'm skipping the flat lock because the flat lock is going to require us to thread in a completely different type of threading sequence. So I want to go ahead and skip over and go straight to your rolled hem. When you do a rolled hem, you are going to be using your right needle and not your left needle. So to do that, we're going to raise the needle to the upright position. And we're going to leave the needle threaded. And I'm going to put my little Allen wrench in to release my needle. Remember, if I'm releasing the needle, I'm then going to tighten back up that screw. Not until I have got the needle in my hand am I going to go ahead and cut my thread. So I am going to go ahead and remove that left needle thread completely from the machine. Okay, the needles are like a sewing machine needle in that they have a flat side, and the flat side is going to go to the back. Now, for some reason, a lot of people struggle getting needles in on a serger. And here is my little tidbit of information for you on that. Have your presser foot down and go ahead and take your needle with the flat side to the back, and I put it down into my needle plate, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're coming from underneath directly up. A lot of people are trying to put these needles in, and what is happening is that they have the needle at an angle. So as opposed to it sitting like this, the needle is kind of bent and they or slanted, and they can't get the needle up into the needle bar. I don't know how well you can see this, but I'm going to try. Patrick, will you grab the camera and see if you can zoom into this so they can see that? Because another big thing with getting needles inserted is that they're not inserted all the way up. And the Babylocks have a little preview window. So I want to be able to point that preview window out to you, but I'm going to have Patrick's help to get the camera there.
Okay, a couple of questions first.
Mm-hmm.
They want to know, can you use just a regular tapestry needle instead of the double I?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then you didn't adjust differential for the neckline, no, right?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. What do you need me to do?
I want you to be able to show them. I'm going to move this needle up and down so they can see. And I don't know. So right in here, right above where the two screws are, there's a little opening.
I'm going to get behind you here. Sorry.
That's okay. There's a little opening. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I can't.
So hopefully you can see that, but there's a little opening, and it has a, I can see it's empty now, and then you can see the tip of the needle. You need to make sure that you can see the tip of the needle in there. And that way you know the needle is all the way up.
So yeah, just a little preview window, and it's kind of hard to show on camera there.
Okay, so earlier we were using overlock needle number 1. So now I need to put my thread in overlock needle number 2. And I can't just move my needle. Some people think they can just move their needle and it will do it, but it won't. Remember, we have automatic tensions. So we have to make sure that we have our thread in the right slot. So this was needle number 1. If I have moved my needle physically to needle number 2, I also need to physically move my needle thread to the right slot. So I'm going to go ahead and thread up needle number 2. And it's going up over the telescopic thread guide, down through my tension. And then it's going to come up and around my taper palm. And I have 2 choices here. I can thread the needle manually, which we're going to try one time. And we got it. So we're just going to leave it there. If I wanted to use my jet air threading, I would have had to have locked my loopers in place, okay? Okay, so now I am changing my stitch over to a 3-thread rolled hem. which is this bottom left corner. And the first thing I'm noticing is it's telling me I need my 02 needle. That's the needle I just put in. My stitch length needs to be set. Now it doesn't know what type of look you're trying to get. So the range is very, very big. It says 0.75 to 4.0, but you see it's got a little R after it. That means it's the rolled hem setting. Do you remember when Patrick was showing you the stitch length dial? You have a standard or a rolled hem, and he was explaining how the rolled hem removes that stitch finger that we've been using to clear the stitch fingers. It gets removed completely in this instance. For a rolled hem setting, my go-to start number is always 1. My stitch width should be 3.5, so I'm changing my stitch width to 3.5. But here's a biggie. Do you see what this one says? Stitch selector needs to be to D. Remember, your stitch selector is what automatically selects your stitches, and my stitch selector on the Triumph is right here, and it's going down to my D setting. And then everything else is going to be identical to what we just did. So basically, in order to get to the rolled hem, we had to move the needle to the right needle position. We had to set our stitch length to a rolled hem setting, and we had to change our stitch selection to D. And then the machine is going to do the rest for us. So what we're going to do now is we're going to lay our fabric right side up. Now, if you are putting a pretty thread in for this technique, you would want to put the thread in your upper looper. Again, I'm just lifting up my foot to start my fabric underneath the presser foot. Now, because my stitch length is set so close, it's going to take longer for it to feed the fabric through. Okay, so here is the finish that we get. A really, really pretty, narrow, tight hemming stitch. This is a stitch that is used a lot on napkins. It's used on like silk scarves. You can even use it for the edge of ruffles, which is what I've just done on this one. But I do want to show you the difference between using a decorative thread on this technique, because it really, truly does make a huge difference when you invest into some of the decorative threads. And I don't know how well you can see that on there. Can they see that pretty good, Patrick?
Yeah, they can. Really.
Okay, so the front one here is standard serger thread. And can you see the black fabric peeking through? Okay, you can see the black fabric behind the stitches. This one has a much fuller look to it. So this one is using a serger thread that traditionally is used on rolled hems. It could be called poly yarn, it could be woolly nylon, lots of different names out there, but basically what it is, it's almost like a fuzzy thread that has a lot of give to it. And what it will do is it will fill in your stitches. So even if you keep your stitch length identical, so these two, the stitch length was identical. The only difference was that we put a decorative thread in our upper looper. You don't need it in your lower looper. Patrick, I need charger, please.
Sharon wanted to know, oh wait, that charge first. Sharon wanted to know what you would do on a rolled hem with your to finish your seams like you did on the, does that make sense?
Okay, what was the question?
It was, what do you do at the corners like on a napkin with a rolled hem?
Oh, a lot of the same that we just talked about when we were doing outside corners with a regular free thread, to be honest with you. So you can serge on and off, which means that each corner you're going to have one tail. And if that's the case, you have a choice. You can bury the chain or the tail.
That's hard to bury though, isn't it?
It is a little bit harder to bury. Most people on that type of thing, especially if they're doing a rolled hem with that heavier thread, you would just use your seam sealant. And then you would let it dry and cut it. A lot of the times on napkins, what I will actually do is just round my corners slightly. And then just exactly what I showed you on how to go around on this, I would do the same thing on that. So I'd only have a start and a stop. I wouldn't have any corners. Does that answer your question, Sharon, I hope? Okay, so that is the rolled hem, and a rolled hem traditionally is done just on a single layer of fabric. If you wanted to do it on 2 layers, you would want to make sure that those layers are adhered together somehow. You'd maybe need to widen your stitch width a little bit so you've got a little bit more thread coverage.
And keep the, our thread is Overlock that has the
Overlock, is the Madeira. Is it Madeira?
It is Madeira.
Yeah, Overlock is, and I think it comes in like 24 different colors, if I'm not mistaken. But you only, like traditionally with a serger, you'll need 3 or 4 spools of thread. On a woolly or Overlock type thread like that, you only need 1 because you'll use matching serger color thread for your needle and your lower looper. Okay, so the last stitch that we are going to look at today, and we are going to do a separate class on the cover and chain because there's just too much to cover on that. And we'll also incorporate, I think, the serger feet into that class, Patrick, if that sounds good.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so the last stitch that we are going to cover today is this stitch. Now, this is an exclusive Babylock stitch, and it's called the wave stitch. You may or may not have it. So if you don't have it and you're leaving us, thank you for joining us today. We will be sending you the recording. But if you want to see how this stitch is formed, I'm going to go ahead and show that to you now. So any of the Babylocks that have the wave option, you're going to be able to do a 3-thread wave like this, or you can even do a rolled hem wave, which is a really pretty finish.
Okay, we just had a really good question from Charlene. About the woolly type of thread. She said, will it eventually clog your looper ports?
No, it won't, but
you show them how to do the thread.
Yes.
Overlock, how much is that? So it's $5.99 a spool, isn't it?
I do not have any of the Overlock thread here today, but I'm going to show you the manual threading system on the sergers because the Overlock thread is really, really light. There's no weight to it. And so it will not go through your jet air threading.
$7 a spool before discount.
So what I'm going to do at this point is I am going to completely unthread my machine because I want to be able to show you this particular stitch does have a really kind of crazy threading system. So to do a manual thread on your sergers, if you have the jet air sergers, you've got this really fine piece of wire that is easily lost, I will say. One end has a loop on it. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, the other end does not. So what we do in order to use this, you still have to lock your loopers in place. So you're going to push this down to the threading, turn your hand wheel towards you until they lock. And then what you'll do is you'll take the end that doesn't have the loop and you will push it into the port until it comes out the other end. So I'm putting mine into the upper looper and I'm going to be watching for it to come out at the end of the upper looper. Oops.
Hard to see that.
So it is right here, okay? And then all you do, and this works for any type of thread. So if you have a thread that has is heavy, like a lot of the 12 weight threads will go through your threading just fine, but some of the like an 8 weight thread will not go through your jet air threading. So what we're going to do is we are going to
So she's going to be threading a heavier thread through this.
and all we do is put the thread through the little loop on that threading tool, and then we just pull it all the way through. And it didn't work.
Oops.
There it goes. So I just used the air threading for the last bit, but traditionally it will just pull all the way through.
Yeah, you just need to make sure it's locked and there's a little tab on that threading tool that you can put your thread in and lock it in.
Okay, so the wave stitch does really require some pretty thread. Believe it or not, I don't have a whole lot of thread here at the house that has different weights of thread. So I'm just using some 12 weight thread that I had.
You want to?
Okay, so I'm getting my quick reference guide out. I'm going to find the right stitch that we're going to thread up for right now. And here is the thread that we are going to, the stitch that we're going to thread up for. And it tells me that I should be using my 02 needle, which I do believe is the needle I have in there. It is. It says my stitch length should be 0.75 to 2.5. So I was on a rolled hem. So I'm going to set this back somewhere between 1 and 2, and we'll show you how that can look different. My stitch width is going to be set to 5. So it's quite a wide stitch. My stitch selector says B. So we're going to put it to B. And now my wave selector says wave. So here is the wave selector. It's going to be on the top right side of your machine. We're going to set that to wave. But here's the challenge. The challenge is we don't thread in the usual places. So let me see if I can explain this to you without confusing you all. So here's my stitch. Now, when we look at this diagram across here, this is the part I want you to look at. We're using the lower looper thread, and it's going through the lower looper tension. I can see that. You can see the dotted line coming down. That's the same. My upper looper thread, which in this instance is shown as yellow, is actually being moved over to my right needle tension. And if you don't put the threads in the right place, you won't get the automatic tension and your stitch won't look good. Now, because my upper looper thread is going through my right needle tension, my right needle thread is actually being scooted over to my left needle tension. But I want to show you a trick on how we do not have to unthread. Patrick, can you hold this for me? So here is my threading right here. And I have just unplugged the phone. Hang on. So this is my upper looper thread. And my upper looper thread needs to go from my upper looper tension over to my right needle tension. So all I need to do is to take the thread out of here and scoot it over one slot to the left. So to do that, we need to take it out of this pre-tension guide. And all I'm going to do is put my finger behind the guide, and I'm going to take my thread and drop it back down into the guide. You'll hear a click, and then pull forward, and it will come right out of there.
It's the coolest trick ever, by the way.
And then I've got my thread out of my tension. Now remember, the looper threading is going to be the same. It's just where it goes into the tension. I'm going to move it from this tension guide over one slot to what would normally be my right needle tension. Okay, and now I need to thread my needle. Now remember, my right needle is now having to go through my left needle tension. So this is a little bit more advanced because it does require you to thread in a little bit of a different sequence. And my needle thread is not threading straight away for me, so I'm going to go ahead and use my air threading. So I've got my right needle in, but it's going through my left needle tension, and I've got my upper looper thread going through my right needle tension. And we are going to do a test sew. Remember, this is only going to look good if you have contrasting threads. And I'm going to change my stitch length out a little bit so you can see some differences. So here is my wave stitch. So this is what I would call a really tight satin with my stitches really close together. I've loosened it up a little bit and then loosened it even more, and you get a much longer wave. But if you like the tight wave look, then you would just do it all in the tight wave. Your stitch length is really going to depend on the type of thread that you put in there and how heavy that thread is. Again, this is one of those techniques you, without any shadow of a doubt, will want to use decorative thread. This will not look pretty if you're using regular serger thread. Okay. Do we have any I've got it on you, Patrick. Oh. Do we have any questions that I haven't answered? You're just answering them?
Just answering them, yeah. So the questions, we do sell those threading tools or the threading. Oh, you want to cover the, when you're using the decorative threads, the little platform that we have there. Mm-hmm. And Those threading tools or the manual threaders are $19.99. They're kind of a pricey thing, but we do sell them if you wanted one of the manual looper threaders.
Okay, so what can happen when you're using decorative spreads, especially ones that are really shiny, is that the threads can drop down and they can get caught underneath here, okay? And then what happens is that jams everything up, and it will probably break a needle, break your thread. Babylock have these foam discs, okay? So anytime you are using a decorative thread, my recommendation is that you put one of your foam discs down. Basically, that will make sure that your thread behaves itself, because it really cannot unravel enough that it would fall off the edge of one of your foam discs.
And then somebody wanted us to cover the inspirational guides.
Oh, great question. Let's see if I have enough life in the phone here to do that. Okay, so the inspirational guides. First of all, they are written for each of the sergers separately. So if you have a Triumph, obviously you're going to want a Triumph. If you have the Accolade, you're going to want the Accolade. It's basically your instruction manual on steroids. So it is a very detailed, tells you what every little screw, every little number, every little guide is, tells you obviously how to do all of the different stitches, but it's more of a technique based. So creating midi braid, doing French seams on the sergers, attaching beads and charms, making serger tassels. So it's more of a technique based, how to do the blanket stitch, how to seam on sheer fabrics. It is more of a technique based book as opposed to your instruction manual, which is your basic instructions. Then in addition to, most of these are $169, I believe. In addition to that, and I do think that this is probably going away based on the fact that the sewing machine foot book has gone away for Babylock. We did check this morning, Babylock still do have some of these in stock. But this is an inspirational guide that goes over all of the serger accessories and attachments. So again, it is a, can you get something to open this, Patrick? Actually, you know what? We'll just use this. Yeah. So this inspirational guide is just on the feet. So this will take you through every foot, and it will tell you what every groove, every screw, every guide is doing on the feet. And then it takes you through techniques using those feet. So you can do like sheared belt loops. This is like gather and you're putting elastic. See how the elastic is inside there? So these are great educational books. If you're the type of person that likes to sit and work your way through workbooks and create the sample, you can attach the sample into the book. You've got raised pin tucks, regular pin tucks, cording, piping, quilting, using the quilting guides, not using the quilting guides, tubes and straps and top stitch and pin tucks using the wave, and just everything you could ever imagine. So those are two helpful reference books that are available. One that is written for your specific machine, and then another one that is written for all of the accessory feet that are available.
And those are all on the website too. So if you, I've actually put all the inspirational guides for the serger under our Facebook Live portion, and we got the 20% off. So if you don't have one of those inspirational guides, I think they're awesome. So you should look into that. And I think we're about done.
Okay, and we will get a new another date set up. Probably we'll probably announce it one day next.
We're going to do an IQ designer class, the first part of
which has got nothing to do with sergers.
April, and then after that we'll do another serger one.
Okay.
Yes, so
okay. Well, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we got all of your questions answered. If we did not, do you know how much the price is on the foot book? Is it $169?
$169. Yes.
$169.
$135 is the discounted price.
$135 with the discount.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.